Yeah, clap before the presentation. Yes, gets us motivated. So my name is Tracy. I am one of the founders and the executive director of New Summit Academy in Costa Rica, The Bridge, which is a young adult program in Costa Rica, and Sibanye, South Africa, which is our new young adult summer program in South Africa.
Hi, I'm Mario Duran. I'm also one of the co-founders of New Summit Academy. I'm the personal growth director. We don't call it therapy, but I'm the clinical director. That's how it translates.
So something that comes up a lot as an administration of a residential program is, parents need us to be in charge of their kids, keep them safe, keep them moving towards their goals, and yet kids also need opportunities to make mistakes and feel empowered and make choices. And so how do we do this? So this is what our presentation is about today, because oftentimes, well, how do we turn boxers into buddies is a little dramatic, but oftentimes we find ourselves in these power struggles of us versus them, or the students feel that, or they try to put us in these situations of, rebelling against the system or fighting the system just to feel their own power. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what's important, or what are priorities for administration and parents, as well as what's important and a priority for students in this process, and how we can turn an us versus them dynamic into more of a collaborative we dynamic.
So the first point, I guess, the first contenders we're going to talk about are the students, or the young adults that we work with.
And they're looking for success, right? There's a notion of success that they have, and it's often linked to happiness, it's often linked to a sense of competence that they have, or that they don't have, right? So when they come to us, they oftentimes are acting in, this is how we call this, students, right? You often see them as experiencing a lot of shame, that are experiencing a sense of failure, they haven't been successful in school or at home. The other core concern is what we call the control and power, right? These guys also crave to be in control of their lives. They may have lost it to depression, anxiety, drugs. They rebel, right? They have lost faith in the system. They, counterculture, right? So we tend to call these guys like the acting out students. And they act out their powerlessness, the hopelessness. The other point is identity and connection, right? This is when the students are spinning their wheels. They're looking for purpose and meaning, that unique identity. So these core concerns are driving those students that we work with.
So today, Mario and I almost dressed up as boxers and got the gloves and decided to just role play some of these things, but then decided maybe that would be a little weird. But you will see today, oftentimes he'll be presenting the side of the students, and I'll be presenting the side of the administration, just so that you can kind of, what are you laughing at? You're imagining it, aren't you? Who would win? That's the question. And I'm going to use administration and parents interchangeably today, because a lot of times as an administration or as program leadership, we find ourselves in the role of parenting, right? And so we're going to look a little bit at some of the goals and objectives of parents, as well as some of the challenges that we face in the parenting styles that we use as an administration. So you may ask, all right, those are the three core concerns of adolescents. They want to feel a sense of success, they want to feel control and power, and they want to feel identity and connection. So what would the priorities for parents be? Pretty much the same thing, right? They may define it differently, but parents also want success. They want their kids to be successful, they want them to be happy, they want them to be good citizens and to contribute to society. They also want to feel control and power. And this isn't always a bad thing. A lot of times it's because they don't want to see their kids get hurt. They don't want to see them go down a negative path or get off track. They don't want to see them make poor decisions, and they want to protect them from harm. And they also want to feel identity and connection. Nobody decides to have kids because they don't want a family, right? Because they don't want to have a sense of community or bonding or connection with their kids. So they also, just like the students, don't want to feel outcast, or they don't want to feel disconnected. The parents are in the same position. So we're going to look at a couple of extremes, I guess you could say, about parenting styles or administration program styles that would be on either end of the spectrum. So first we're going to look at a control-focused example. So if we took the parental program priorities, as an administration, we're usually thinking about managing risk, right? How do we keep kids safe? And also, we all believe that kids need to earn what they get, and they need to be set up for the real world. And we also need to measure what we're doing. Does it work? How are the outcomes? And we need consistency and predictability. So setting up kind of this little diagram here is a little bit like a level structure or a really concrete, tangible way to get through a program or to get through growth. So there are obviously pros and cons to this method. Some of the pros are already listed there, right? It's safe, you can manage risks easier, you can measure outcomes more easily. But what are some of the cons of this approach, of an overly structured approach?
Well, that might restrict growth.
It might restrict growth, right? Because we're putting them in a box that maybe robs them of opportunities. Okay, another question. Who would this work for? That's not to say this doesn't work. Are there any specific issues or kinds of kids that this would work well for? Or any stage of development that this might work well for?
Concrete kids.
Concrete kids, right? Who need a little more black and white structure. Maybe younger kids. All right, so now we're going to go to the other extreme, which is the empowerment-focused example.
So when we work with students that come in, they want their power back, they want their identities, they want to be individuals, they want everything individualized. For the sake of boxing with the administration, there are some student priorities. Sometimes these programs can also be on the other side of the spectrum, where my privileges are my rights, where the line between my needs and my wants are just erased. And this is another way of looking at it. Like in parenting too. Sometimes we get to work with kids where that line has been erased. So on the same type of logic, what are the pros and cons of a program where we respect that type of individualism so much? What kind of profile might this work for? Where we don't have that type of structure, where things are more loose, everything is negotiable. Consequences, well, not really, because we can talk about it, because, well, you're different than you are, and, the community, well, that's not so important, because you're the more important. Who would that work for? The kid that seems to be like really high functioning, that wants to be free. If we set ourselves to navigate in either side, we might be reproducing ineffective ways of setting these kids up for success.
And I would add too that there are some, we've worked with some kids who actually needed some individualization and negotiation because they were too compliant. They didn't value themselves enough. But part 2 of this presentation is going to talk about some specific tools and techniques and structures that help balance out these two needs so that we can still have consistency and risk management, but also allow some wiggle room and some gray area for empowering students. So how do we turn this us versus them paradigm into a we? So in our program, we use supportive immersion, and the main part of this that applies is collaborative empowerment. So empowerment traditionally has this concept of one person having power, the adult having power, and giving it to the student. We look at this a little bit differently by saying this is more of a 50-50 approach. So I have power, but you have power. And if we collaborate together, we can both use our power for the best income. So this improves engagement, and this improves reciprocity. So if we're asking our kids to be engaged in our programs, learn how to be a reciprocal, interdependent person in a relationship, we need to model that for them. Secondly, if we're asking our students to continue to grow and learn, we also need to model that for them. If we create a rigid program structure that never changes, that never stops and takes a step back and reflects on, where am I? Where are we as a program? Where do we want to go? what's the context I'm in? Is that changing? If we don't ever do that, how do we expect our students to learn how to do that as well? So that requires us to have a little bit more complexity in our internal development as a program, rather than a rigid, linear, or externally imposed definition of what is required for success. And lastly, we want our students to learn resilience, right? Which means we push them outside their comfort zone. They don't always get what they want. They have to delay gratification. Well, how comfortable are we doing that as a program? How comfortable are we being put outside of our comfort zone or being changed as a program by our students based on what they need? So again, it's all about modeling. And in that, the students are able to collaborate with us and feel more a part of the process. So we actually are going to have this part of the presentation, we're going to have some of our students pretty much do this part for us. So we got our iPhones out and asked our students some questions about these techniques and tools. So you'll hear a lot of their voices, but I'm going to let Mario warm us up with the first tool and technique that a lot of us might already use.
So the idea is to consider that we all do this already to some degree. By saying warm-up is because I think we all believe that including your client or your student in treatment planning is a good idea, right? We're going to start there because we know that works. And we're going to take it one step forward each time.
What skills did you build in that process or in that experience?
I think I, for one, learned how to set real goals for myself, like day-to-day goals versus week-long or extended period-long goals. I also take into account that some things can be put into goals, they just have to be worked in, and you'll see results. But yeah, I've gained a lot from being able to set my own goals because every morning I kind of set a goal for the day, I got this to do, I got this homework, etc. And it kind of makes for a broader feeling of success daily, which is really cool.
So, how are you getting better at making your own goals?
I don't really agree that practice makes perfect, but definitely practice yourself a lot. And practiced it since last year in November, 2016. And every day you kind of understand more and more what you're capable of and how far you're willing to push yourself. And you can always push those boundaries within certain respects. But yeah, I think I've gotten better at it by understanding where I'm at and the difference between where I'm at and where I want to be.
Okay.
So, I'm pretty sure you've heard this before, right? Kids getting better at setting goals, improving the way he relates to his own ability to grow, right? So, as a program, we need all of that. Quality, we need to measure outcomes, we need to measure success, right? And they need to feel accomplished and that they can do it successfully, right? The next one is a little bit different, okay? Because when you do treatment planning, of course you want buy-in, and what sometimes you have to do is get the student to probably buy into some of the areas of attention that he may not agree, well, no, I don't have that much inside or something like that. But this one is a little bit different because you're actually inviting the student to change the system and to change it with you.
Yeah, so our proposal system is integrated into the student council of the program. And the student council is not traditional. It has different titles for the members, and they have specific objectives like activities coordinator, financial coordinator, because the students have a budget that they can spend as they plan out their monthly activities. And then we also have president, vice president. Andy, help me out here. Who am I missing? Yeah, our IT manager who manages all of the technology and internet access on campus. And we have a proposals coordinator. So students can write personal proposals if they need a personal exception for something, like maybe they want to add a couple days to their home visit, or they want a specific privilege, then they write it specifically for themselves. But they can also write a handbook proposal, which is really about changing the system or changing the structure. Obviously, some rules are non-negotiable that have to do with safety, but there are plenty, like hairstyles, as you can see. They just passed a proposal to change the hairstyle policy because we had a pretty conservative hairstyle policy and they wanted to be able to grow it long, make dreads if they wanted, and things like that. And it was quite a process, but they made it happen. So I'm going to let this young man tell you from his perspective what the proposal process is about, and then we'll listen to some other students about what they gained from the proposal system. So tell me about the proposal system and how it works.
The proposal system is where students can voice their concerns and try to change rules. And basically how do you do that is you get a staff sponsor. And if it's a personal proposal, you get staff and team approval. And if it's a handbook proposal, you have to go through a team and do the administration. And basically you write it, and it's a paragraph of like what's the issue, what you're trying to change, and how it'll help benefit the community or you personally. And so you write it, turn it into the proposals review team, and they'll go over it, give you feedback, and then the next week you will walk to them in their meeting and basically tell them how you applied that feedback and what your plan is, and they'll let you know if it's going to get passed or not. And once it gets passed, like if it's a club, you can set up an outing with BGA, or if it's a personal, like extended home visit or something like that, it's passed, you can go. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay, that was pretty good. I think you did a better job than I would have. So we're going to listen to a few more students, but these guys, I like hearing them talk about this.
What are the positive parts of your experience writing proposals?
I guess just the idea that you can change something in your immediate environment, or the structure that you actually have a problem with, sort of gives you the ability to do something for yourself. It also makes it so that if you are complaining about your situation, where you're at, you can do something about it, and you don't really have an excuse to do that.
Do you think this helps you like in the real world?
I do. It's important to look at issues from different sides, and also just to present your thoughts in a well thought out way.
Yeah, so the format of a proposal actually requires quite a bit of work and quite a bit of perspective taking. So there is a template for it, and they have to look at the student perspective and write that out, staff perspective, parent perspective, educational consultant perspective, and our Costa Rican community perspective. So they have to look at all these different views and say, how would someone else feel about this, or how would they look about that, and how would I address those concerns? So if we're trying to represent our school in the Costa Rican community, what effect does having dreads have on our image? And how do we mitigate that risk or that potential damage to our image? So these are the exercises that they have to go through before they submit a proposal to the committee for feedback and passing or not.
I would say having the power to change things is ultimately positive, as well as collaboration, like working as a group in a lot of instances, not only students and students, but students and staff, enhance my knowledge of myself that I don't like not being in control. I learned how to better take other people's opinions and listen to them, even when I didn't necessarily agree. And also, just basic communication skills of like someone who is ultimately passing the proposal, giving me feedback, and then me not liking that feedback necessarily, kind of having to decide, do I agree with this? Do we compromise? Because maybe there isn't a compromise, and then it just doesn't get passed unless you decide to change it. So yeah.
How do you think the administration or staff work together with students?
Definitely the proposal system is a big part of that, and especially when you have an administration reach out to you about like your proposal you're working on and telling you like, hey, like this is why, you know, you should write it. We're all like in favor of it. It follows these things. So it's more of them telling you like this is how you're gonna get it if you follow it, and it like helps you change stuff and like grow basically because working with someone who knows how the administration thinks, and EE staff also will help you with it, like your staff sponsor will tell you, like, I've seen this in the past and it hasn't worked out, so like let's imply all this different stuff so it will work out now. Yeah.
So it helps you work with the system rather than against it?
Yes, basically.
And we also think is that too. Okay. How do you think this will help you in your future?
Well, it helps you work with someone instead of going against them, and it helps you not use your emotions as much as your like logical thinking and reasoning into why it's gonna help you, not just like I want it now and I should get it.
Are you continuing to get better at any of those things?
One thing I didn't mention, I guess, is like the process of writing the proposals in itself is, I think, pretty practical for many people's future. There's a lot of jobs and whatnot. You would probably be asked if you're capable of doing similar things. It teaches you how to write too, just like trying to make something read appealing. So, because you can't explain it further necessarily. So it's what's on the paper is the proposal, and that's your communication tactic. I, for one, have been trying to become a better, more effective writer, and I think the proposal system will help with that. And I think with that skill of writing to ask for something will most likely be used again in my life.
What skills did you build in that process?
Critical thinking, I guess, because it lets you look at an issue from different sides, the opposite point of view. You see feedback, it helps you to understand what the people that are looking at your proposal, what they're looking for, what their concerns are. So it helps you write a two-sided proposal.
Okay, before we move on, are there any questions about this? We'll take a couple minutes and then move on to the next tool or technique.
Can you talk a little bit about folks that maybe want to do a proposal, but then they don't have the motivation or the chutzpah to see it all the way through, and how you work with that?
It happens a lot, and a lot of these guys are, they've been with us for several months, so they started out as the ones who just complained and were passive and victimizing and saying, it means they'll write a proposal, and it became like the worst thing that they could ever hear. Like, don't tell me to write a proposal. It's scaffolding, right? So, like a good teacher would, you sit with them, you help them go through the process, you don't do it for them, but you ask them the questions that they need to think through to sort of process and get through the proposal. And then you just take it step by step. So they have had proposals, plenty that don't get passed, right? But at least by going through that process with someone, they've learned how to take the different perspectives, how to sort of predict what a staff member might be concerned about so that they can address it ahead of time. And then working as a group. So, that's what the proposal officer is for. So if this young man is our proposal officer for student council, we say, hey, Mario wants to write a proposal, but he's not sure really where to start or how to do it. Can you go help him out? And then student to student, yeah, because then that's what they're saying. It's nice working with other students and with staff sponsors to sort of make it happen.
I would add that the staff sponsor is also held responsible for turning in the proposal and helping it follow through. So the student knows that we are also part of it.
And sometimes the proposals just die because just the process of going through all of the perspective taking, that helps the student realize oh, I get it. I get why we can't go get tattoos as 15-year-olds in a foreign country. All right, we'll let that one go. Let's try another one. That's in part 3 of our presentation. So good way to predict what the issues are going to be. So we will come back to that because it applies across the board, because all of these things, like we said, as parents or administrators, it's easier, I don't mean it's easy, well it is, it's easier and more comfortable for us to have more predictability and to hold those boundaries and just know what to expect, rather than get our hands dirty in the gray area and really not have control over what might happen. All right, so I'm going to pass it to Mario for the next tool or technique, which is less of a, this is definitely a student life, student leadership technique and tool that you can use, and now we're going to talk a little bit more about a therapeutic tool or technique.
The next one is called honor council meetings. This is born out of group psychology, group therapy, Gestalt approaches. We're going to let this young man explain it, but I'll kind of front load that it basically gives you more of a community approach to problem solving.
What are some ways that you think our administration works with students to give them voice and power in their process?
I think definitely honor councils, because in an honor council, a mixed group of staff and students, staff from EE, PG, academic, and a matching number of students get together and give the students the specific student in the honor council feedback, and that's a good way for all parts of the community to let someone know something that they need to know. And also to get an idea of where you are. And then they end that honor council with a list of decisions and recommendations for the student that they either have to or are recommended to follow through that will help them.
Tell me about the decisions and recommendations.
So decisions are often either a status change or going to a specific group. Status change being if you're on regular and maybe you made a mistake, you lose some privileges until you can prove that you earn them again. Or you are on a lower status or regular and you want to gain privileges. And a decision can also be go attend this group or this club, or talk to this therapist about something specific. It's to promote an action that needs to happen. And a recommendation is more like, hey, we think this would be good for you, so maybe you should try it. You don't have to, but this is what we're recommending.
And who comes up with the decisions and recommendations?
It's on the spot, all of them come up together on consensus with the decisions and recommendations. It's not like there's a list of decisions that you can have and you throw them in. It's so it was kind of like compromising the consequence. I guess there's no set list, it's just coming up with what works.
So it's individualized?
Yeah, very individualized.
Okay. And how do they choose who participates in the honor council?
Based on status, you have to be on regular or honor status. And if there's somebody called an honor council on a student, they'd be in it. If there's someone's mentor, they'd be in it. If there's a staff that wants to give specific feedback to a student, they'll be in it. And most of the times I've had on council, I have requested for students to be in it that I think will give me good and honest feedback.
It's a good way of looking at, again, those concerns that brought us to the mat, right? They want success, they want control, they want their power back, they want their own identity, right? And we want to do it in a way that provides enough individual time, but also within the community. Okay, so this is a pretty good tool. A good way to look at it also is the collaboration, the empathic recommendations, and it's passed on from one generation to the next. It's part of a peer culture. Right? There's not a sense of this is a punishment or a reward. It's just kind of what we do, right? So when somebody says there's an honor council, it's not like, oh crap, I have an honor council. It's like, oh, there's an honor council. This is what we do. Right? So they start to internalize that this is a good way to live, to interact, to build community. It becomes part of the program, and they're on the schedule and staff and students know that there's a time slot where there's honor councils. It's part of the culture, it's what we do.
This is process-based scaffolding means that we look at where the student is in their process and create the amount of structure and support that they need at that point. Yes, feedback's important, and in a therapeutic environment, it should be safe enough that anybody could give feedback at any time. However, in the real world, that's not necessarily going to be the case. So an honor council system kind of says, yes, we still value feedback as a group, as a small group, and peer support, but we want to do it in the right time and place, right? Because a lot of kids talked about issues with transitioning and how it was so difficult to go from a safe emotional environment into the real world where people don't accept feedback well, or they don't want to hear it, or they don't give you feedback. So this is also a tool that's kind of a middle ground between a super therapeutic setting like a wilderness and a traditional school setting that may not have opportunities for peers to give each other feedback and support. And it also balances, the collaborative consensus. The group has to agree on the decisions and recommendations. So it is individualized in that way, but it's not a therapist saying, well, this is what I think would be good for you right now. It's saying, the therapist does get to say that, but then the kids get to say, well, I don't know, that didn't work for me. Or I don't know, what really worked for me was when this happened, or I went to this group, or I joined this club. So it is a collaborative process, and the students accept the decisions and recommendations so much more easily because they don't feel it's a power trip.
But then again, as therapists or teachers or staff, you also have to accept that the students may drive some of the decision making, and you may feel like, oh, I don't know. But you have to reach consensus. We don't vote, Sometimes, we take half an hour deliberating, literally, on what the outcome is going to be. But that's part of the difference, like Heather was saying, in the type of collaboration, where we're 50-50, right? You have to accept that they have their own power and that you have your power, and then we're going to look at the students' best interests.
What do you think are the main skills that students learn through the honor council process?
I think definitely that feedback is not to hurt, it's to help. Because when you hear so many people coming from different places giving you feedback, it's like, oh wow, they're really trying to get me to fix this for the benefit of me, not because they're annoyed by it. Maybe they are, but maybe it'll help you in learning that. And I think also definitely just the improving the sense of community.
So what did you learn about yourself? Or what have you learned about yourself when you've been in honor council?
I've learned that I can be sometimes so wrapped up in my own head that I forget the consequences of my actions on others, people that care about me. When your parents tell you something, sometimes you, as a teenager, think you brush it off. But when your friend tells you something in a small setting, you're like, oh crap, it's something, I gotta take this seriously. And so that's sort of the sense of agency. Stuff that was hard for me in the past is something I almost automatically do now, which is something that kind of wouldn't happen without the setting of honor council for people to be very true and honest.
Are there any other skills that you think you built?
I think I've built a sense of agency, and just alright, I'm nearing adulthood, I'm 17 years old, and I've realized, through my process in general, and partially through honor councils, that I need to just do things for myself, that I need to do my work, because I'm almost 18, or I'm 17, and that's just part of life. And you got to just continue doing that, working to be independent. I've learned to, other people observe to me that I sit in my own crap, right? When I'm not doing well. And that's been observed in honor councils. And right before my second home visit, I wasn't doing great. I got this feedback from honor council. There weren't even any decisions. It was literally just for me to hear people. I was up in needs of support. So I was going home and I wasn't doing great. I was just sort of depressed and anxious. I was struggling. But after the honor council, I got my stuff together. I went from like almost failing some classes to getting straight A's and B's. It was actually a really strong moment of like overcoming something that I got through this like feedback.
So we're going to go over a couple of other examples that we can go into in more depth at the end. But first, is there any other area of the program that you feel shows a good balance between administrative need for control and risk management, but balanced with students' need for empowerment and experience?
I definitely think transition. I'm currently in transition, and it's a good balance between giving us like privilege and giving us kind of the leeway to transition back into the real world as we refer to it. And yeah, I'm in TS right now, so I have my phone, my computer, and more internet access, and I have to balance that with getting my homework done without the structure of living off campus, budgeting my own meals. I'm with 4 other guys and 2 house parents. And also in transition, we don't go to normal groups like the other students. We go to special transition groups for getting our plan done, for the logistics of our plan, relapse prevention, family dynamics, all that. And then we also have workshops that are based on like moving back into the real world again, like cooking or fixing a car or budgeting your money or what was the one we just did? A resume, we make our resume. So yeah, it's anything that we'll be using when we leave here is preparing us to go home or college or wherever.
The other thing that he talked about was how good it was to work with his parents. And this is something we'll talk about 3 or 4 slides down when we talk about how do you get staff on board, how do you get families on board, because it does no one any good to use all of these great tools and empower students and then they go out and no one else has learned how to support them in that way. But he talks about how good it was to work with his parents who had a transition plan and he who had a transition plan, and they did that same dynamic of processing and figuring out, well, who wins this boxing match, or do we compromise, or what are the agreements that we make for my next step, whether that's home or college, or who pays for what, and all that kind of stuff. One really easy one is to incorporate student leadership into therapeutic groups. Ask students to play lead roles in different therapeutic groups that you offer. But this is something that doesn't require a lot of work or investment in order to make it happen and to help students feel empowered. Same thing with clubs and activities, to give students a voice in organizing and planning different recreational activities or outings. Again, helps them feel like they're part of the process of owning that activity, which can actually help manage risks off campus, because the more students that feel responsible for a trip going well or an activity going well, the more likely they are to hold other students accountable if they're getting squirrely. Internet and technology. We did a presentation on this 2 years ago at NATSAP, I think, so I didn't want to make this presentation about that, but figuring out how to allow students to be connected through technology and internet at whatever level is appropriate for them. It's a big, crazy question that a lot of programs struggle with because of the amount of risk involved, of things or people that they might have access to. But it's definitely worth the exercise of seeing if you can do it. We've done it for years and have found it to be more beneficial than not because of the real world things that it brings in to be processed in a safe environment. Again, it's a lot of work. It's not as easy. They certainly know how to get around it sometimes, but those are opportunities that they have to make choices. And those are opportunities that we have to process the choices that they make and why and how it affects them, so that hopefully those lessons or those insights can be internalized a little bit more for their next step or for their future. Mario's going to talk briefly about the costs and benefits of doing this.
So some of the things that we've seen, for example, are very practical. Like, for example, it takes a lot of energy, coordination, for example, with scheduling. When you program these kind of things, you got to make sure that different departments are working together. Another one has a lot to do with how we document. Because we produce a lot of good information that could be feedback loop with the treatment planning, which is integrative treatment planning. But if we don't document and if we don't communicate this to the treatment teams, then it didn't matter, right? It's like it never happened. So we need to make sure that we create the culture within the staff, the faculty, just as we're doing it with the peer culture. It does require a lot of training, especially if the staff needs to be proactively engaging the students and modeling. This takes quite a bit of getting into it with the students, so it doesn't become a power struggle, right? And getting more into the same playing field sometimes is not what the adults are used to. And basically, also the students are constantly inviting you to, the boxing match, right? Because that's what they're used to as well. In terms of cost, also, there has to be a lot of investment in organizational sensitivity. Because all of a sudden, for example, in an honor council, just because it's a therapeutic group, it doesn't mean that the therapeutic piece is more important than the academic piece, experiential staff is saying, or what the students are saying. So there's a lot of equity involved there. It's a different type of approach. So when we're working with adults that are well educated and have degrees and whatever, you also have egos involved, right? So we also have to work with a lot of that, which is the same work we do with parents, right? I'm not going to dedicate a lot of time to the rewards because I think you heard a lot of that from the students. That's a really good question. We actually took out some clips where some of the older students actually mentioned this, how the student leadership actually plays a big role in that. The mentoring and the student leadership oftentimes takes care of some of it, the complaining or the, hey, can we change this, can we change that? Once they've been in the program for enough time, and they've gained enough agency and enough experience, and they've been empowered enough, they get to a point where they can actually help the other students, the newer students, kind of realize how to channel it, almost like becoming rebellious, but with a cost in a way, right? So at the beginning, usually the first 3 months or so, you see some of that, right? But after they become more acquainted, with the system and the structure, and they understand that there has to be some things that are non-negotiable, there's risk management involved, and the peer culture actually reinforces that because they also get annoyed. It's not just the adults that get annoyed with some of that. They tend to mitigate some of that.
Can I add to that? I think it's also back to the idea of collaborative empowerment and reciprocity. It's perfectly acceptable and expected that a staff or an adult would set their boundary too, and part of the process going through this is the perspective taking process. So to be able to say, okay, sure, let's look at what that would look like, and then the students themselves come to realize like, oh, okay, I see why we can't do that now, and then that filters into the peer culture so that older students. Yeah, one of the guys said like, well, I used to think it was this, but now I see why it's that way and I wouldn't change it at all. Because now they see how the newer students are annoying because they want to change this and they want to change that and they're just not mature enough yet to understand the system. So it's partly peer culture mentoring and it's also partly like this collaborative empowerment piece that says, yeah, I'm willing to work with you on this. Are you willing to work with me? Because I have boundaries too and we have needs too. I think that's, if you can keep that in the conversation, it's probably the quickest or most effective way to keep it from being that overly empowered model that says, what do you want and how can we make that happen for you? Yeah.
There are also interventions that have already built-in dynamics that tend to stop some of these things. For example, in honor council meetings, if you can't reach consensus, then you have to remain with whatever you came in with, right? So that it doesn't go, forever. If a proposal can linger there forever, it has like a due date, and if it doesn't pass, then we don't look at it until the next quarter, right? So it kind of goes away. So because of that balance between risk management and program integrity, that's a big theme, I guess. Program integrity has to be well kept in a way too. So you gotta give them a voice, you gotta give them a map all the way, but the program integrity piece has to remain priority one, right? Priority one in terms of, we're serving families, we're serving kids, we have stakeholders. So you gotta have some built-in systems that provide the safety net, right? So that it's not a free-for-all.
All right, part 3 is it takes a village. So this goes back to some of the earlier questions about how to get people on board with this, staff, students, and parents. How do we get buy-in and investment from students? Students actually become more committed to the program as they see results and as it becomes part of the culture that gets handed down. So again, this early mistrust of the system or the hierarchy starts to dissipate as they start to see the staff actually respond, or the groups respond, or older students say, oh no, actually this can work, it happened, we did this last quarter. Students also see the value of achievements and consequences for themselves and others. As you heard some of them say themselves, they feel a sense of accomplishment when they get something passed or when they have a positive honor council outcome. And they also feel a little bit validated when they see consequences for themselves or other students who need those boundaries or who need those consequences. Another thing that your program can do, is we just talked about, is set that boundary. What's non-negotiable for you? For us, it's safety of self and others, right? There are certain things that there are going to be immediate consequences for because of safety, but there are other things like hairstyles or internet use or things like that that really should be in the gray area and should be a little bit more responsive to the context and the students that you're working with staff. And as Mario said earlier, students also start to buy in when they see that staff are held accountable as well. They feel that it's fair. So if staff don't give feedback to their proposal on time, and the proposal passes then automatically, that's a big deal, and it's because staff was unresponsive or didn't follow through with their executive functioning. And how do we get buy-in from staff? So staff culture also needs to be connected and see the results. And this may take a while, but as we just talked about, just like student peer culture, it happens in staff culture as well. We have an interesting situation in Costa Rica because a lot of our staff are Costa Rican, and they don't really know the concept of a boarding school. That doesn't exist. You don't have boarding schools in Costa Rica, so even when we started, the idea that parents would let their kids live in a different country without the family system there to support was just like out of their mind. And in some instances, the Costa Rican staff almost sabotaged the process a little bit because they didn't believe that this was a good thing, that families should do this. But as time went on, and they saw the results, and they saw the families coming for the workshops and reconnecting and being grateful and kids growing up and maturing, then they started to, again, see the results and therefore be able to be on board with what we were doing. These techniques are also great for staff investment because then they're not just police officers. We were talking last year about retention, and we have amazing retention at our school. I think the staff feel like a part of the family. They feel like they can influence and impact the students and have a significant parenting role that's valued. They're actually building relationships and feeling like no matter what their education, no matter what their age or gender or anything else, they're able to make a difference in someone's life and see that result. And then modeling feels good because don't we all feel better when we're walking the talk, when we're doing what we say we do? Now I'm going to let Mario talk about how we get parents on board.
So when we work with the families and the students, we really are doing it so that they can get back to their families or to their life, the real world, as they would say. So we have to have a lot of intentionality behind all of this so that it's transferable to the family, right? The parents also need to make a real investment in learning how to collaborate and how to shift their paradigm so that what we tried and what we worked so hard to convey to the students and to get them to buy into keeps working, right? So what we try to do is work with the parents so that they don't have to lower the bar, but actually redefine success. Very often when we do the new family workshops, parents come in with a lot of guilt, with a sense of failure, saying, I'm on a roller coaster. Okay, my kid's in a therapeutic placement now. I'm going to have to lower the standards for my kid. As opposed to, let's redefine success. Let's take a different approach, right? So we work with the parents to become a different parent in a way, but not in the sense of changing who they are, but in the way that they see their kid, right? In the way they see themselves too. What it means to them to be a successful parent. So we go through the same route, right? Control and power becomes a big theme in all the work that we do with parents. Same with the idea of individuation. We all know that that's a key concept in family work, but how we do it has a different twist. The idea, as my colleague Kelly Well would say, is not to invest in controlling behavior, but investing in their relationship. And when they actually get it, they begin to understand how they can do the 50-50, as opposed to just downloading knowledge into their kid. It's really hard for them to let go of this idea of I'm the agent of change for my son, or I need to keep them from this or the other. So when they start to understand that what we did, that it worked, and why it worked, then they start to hone in those skills themselves. Right? Remember, we did a parallel with program management and risk management and parenting. So we're kind of doing that in the reverse, right? So now we're trying to tell the parents, all right, we managed this program in a certain way. You can manage your parenting in a certain way. It's going to be way more effective, and you're going to have more feelings of success. You're going to feel more in control. And part of feeling in control is actually not controlling your kid, but actually controlling your own self-care, for example. So we change the way that they see it by helping them focusing on their own self-care and not so much on what the kid's going to do and not going to do. Meaning how much they're going to focus on outcome as opposed to letting go of the outcome of whatever the student is going to do and focusing on what they can control. We talked about earlier about the difficulties with setting boundaries and feeling that they can hold the student accountable or their son accountable. So they try to really rebuild this idea of what is having integrity as a parent. Same happens with the identity and connection, right? Just as the kids say, I'm going back to the real world, the parent also works on taking back my son to the real world. And what does that mean? If they go to college, to school, their own identities as a family is rebuilt. And we call it redefining an authentic family identity, right? Almost like matching your offline identity with your online identity.
So some of the underlying skills to do that are part of supportive immersion. The other two facets of supportive immersion that allow us to be collaborating and empowering each other. And these are things that parents can learn as well. So one is empathic connection. So we don't know if everybody's ready for a 50-50 collaborative empowerment. As we talked about earlier, sometimes more structured, rigid, or predictable experiences are more appropriate at a certain time in one's development. But we need to know where the student is and what's meaningful to them and what they can handle. So this is on a big scale as far as a program structure, but this is also true in a one-on-one interaction. So when you're working in an honor council, really what the professionals are trying to do is understand, where is this kid? And what's going on for him right now? And therefore, what kind of structure and support is going to be most beneficial or most effective for him in this situation. And that's what we talked about a little bit earlier with process-based scaffolding, which says once I can empathize and connect with this kid to know where he is, how do I scaffold the structure and support and experiences that he needs or she needs right now to keep moving forward and keep learning? Because we don't want to put them so far out of their comfort zone that they shut down, but we don't want to make them so comfortable that they're not challenged to grow and learn. This is the same for parents, right? We have to work in the same way with parents. We have to teach parents these same skills so that when they're interacting with their sons, they're understanding where they are, how they can work together to empower each other as parent and child, and also what kinds of experiences or structures are needed to facilitate growth and continued connection. Those are all references for the photos that I stole from the internet, because I want to be ethical about it. Thanks so much for joining Mario and I for our presentation today. If you'd like to learn more, please visit newsummitacademy.com or supportiveimmersion.com. Thank you.